try the untried. And there are but a small number of times life gives you a perfect state of mind. What I haven't done, I desire. What I will become, or to Have seen more than 24 springs since she saved a life stair falling, and our fates flashed before her as she slipped. She couldn't safe asleep between her ribs. They tell me take a step out of my head. Don't think of what will have been said. What I haven't done, I desire. What I will become, or to
Hi, I'm Forrest Cochran. This is Straightening the Record podcast, episode 1. I'm here in my apartment with Ryan Steer. if you've been going to shows in Des Moines, Ames, Iowa in general, lots of other places these days, you may well have seen Ryan playing with the River Monks, Seedlings, Anna Libera, and recently with Mumfords. If you went to that was Max Ames, right?
Yeah.
And as of now, the main focus is Extravision, which
No pun intended, right?
right.
Didn't look intended.
The main focus.
There was no wink or anything.
No. The main focus is Extravision, which is basically Ryan and whomever else he recruits to help him realize the vision of whatever he's got. It's been touted a lot lately as a malleable project, meaning that takes a lot of different forms. Whoops, just knocked the table there with my foot.
It's very casual here.
Yeah,
in the studio.
We're being exceptionally casual, drinking LaCroix. We've got the fish tank in the background. We got Rudy, my roommate Jonathan's cat, gonna make a few appearances probably. She is a talker. And we've got a pretty decent fire going in the apartment as well.
Yeah.
So this is really cozy. This is the second time that I've had Ryan in here doing this because the software I was using last time screwed up real bad, and it got real ugly.
The conversation sucked anyway for us. So
yeah,
it was the reason why we're here.
It was terrible. No, but it's really exciting to have you back, and
I'm excited to be back, honestly. It feels really good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, so the goal kind of for this podcast is, we do have other people in Des Moines who cover local musicians, and I will gladly acknowledge that. I love listening to Pants Off podcast, and I've had a lot of fun listening to Chris Ford's podcast, Conquered for Life, where he talks not only just with his co-host, but with some other cool musicians from around here. But here we're like kind of focusing on the creative process, which I think only really big famous musicians usually get to talk to people about how they do what they do. And I thought it'd be really awesome to change that if possible and focus, mostly on people from around here, which is, if you don't know, we're from Des Moines, Iowa. And I have Ryan here not only because he's a close friend and I wanted to start with somebody who I'd be comfortable with, but also because he's been one of my favorite local musicians since like 2009 or so when the River Monks were first getting started, and I've really enjoyed watching the progression of this thing, Extravision, going from pretty much mostly seeing you do it with just your guitar to seeing you do it with a band some, and then seeing you do it, getting back to the malleable thing, I guess, with synthesizers integrated and drum machines and stuff like that, which is really cool. And now with a whole different live band, well, half a different live band,
Mostly different, yeah.
And
Ben Dixon's been kind of the one consistent piece of the puzzle, and he adds such a diverse and spacious sound that it's been really fun to create with him and kind of like direct the focus to make sure that I'm including that type of spaciousness into the sound, and having that like kind of, it's not really a parameter, but just having that in mind kind of like is a fun way to kind of keep the focus.
Yeah, I bet. I noticed when I was looking at the Bandcamp page for Extravision that you actually have him as credited for writing additional music or something like that.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I guess that hadn't occurred to me before I did that. That people other than you were involved in writing this stuff. And he does play like a lot of really awesome riffs and stuff, and a lot of like, obviously his main role sort of is the lead guitar player, as it were, but like that's not really all he does.
True.
Because I mean, one of the things that I think is really cool on this album, oh yeah, so Extravision is releasing officially the first full length here in about 2 weeks, and on the album Waking Up, one of the really cool things that I started noticing hearing the songs lots and lots of times was how there's a lot of melodies and little bits that where the vocals and the guitars or the vocals and keyboards will double things, and I sort of wondered like how much of that is like already there when you're writing the song initially by yourself, and like how much of that sort of gets brought to the table by Ben or by somebody else.
Certainly, yeah. Well, the first album was, and I say the first album because we're already working on a second album. The whole and the approaches for the two have been a lot different, I think. But the first album was, a lot of the music was written just while Ben and I were kind of just jamming together, and like he would bring, he would just start playing a chord progression, and maybe I had some like spare lyrics laying around, and I would start singing them over something that he was playing, or he would just be kind of like riffing on some chords, and I would start playing like some little melodies over it. And so, or we would be playing with, like, we'd be rehearsing with a full band, and as Ben's kind of developing his guitar parts, he'll start adding kind of a melody, and then I hear that melody and like, okay, let's extend that melody over to the saxophone or the synthesizer or something like that. And really a lot of the album was kind of like finding those things that our ears were perking up for, and like kind of pushing those up to the front, and having more than one person emphasize those parts.
Yeah, make them feel more like a distinct characteristic of the song rather than being sort of incidental.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, for instance, the thing that's popping into my head right now, and I'm not even remembering which song it's from, but the is that one of those things where it's sort of just like came into being while rehearsing it?
Yeah. You're talking about Moments of Silence. I remember that being a song. I think we were actually practicing in the Good Cat practice space, because Ben plays in Good Cat as well. I think we were maybe just like playing through like that kind of main chord progression in the song, which is the same chord progression as Lay 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 Bob Dylan.
Cool.
And I remember just like kind of picking through the melody until the melody that you'll hear in the song fell into place. And I really like how, I think we were working with Nick Frampton at the time. He was the keyboard and synthesizer player on the record, as well as a engineer and producer for a lot of the sounds you hear on the record. He kind of decided to introduce that part with just the synthesizer in the intro, and then when it comes back in the second, or, halfway through the song, you hear it with more guitars and saxophones and stuff like that, and it just kind of like re-emphasize is the thing. It's not just like, oh, here it comes again. It's like, okay, now it's like,
It's like a theme.
yeah, you're starting to hear it more as a theme.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's really cool. So speaking of Nick, and his role of producer, as you were in the process of recording this record, because it happened over the course of like 2 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
You had some of it recorded with Phil at his old studio,
Mm-hmm.
with Phil Young, I should clarify for those who don't know Phil. Some of it with Phil Young at Wabi Sound, which was his home studio, which he had for quite some years.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of it with Nick at the studio he used to work at in Colorado. So what's that like, sort of just passing it off to somebody to do stuff with it, like 2 states over for some amount of time? Or like, were you still actively involved with it then? And
So, the timeline kind of, I remember we recorded the drums and bass together, with some like acoustic, scratch tracks, with Phil at Wabi Sound. And, a few months into the recording process, it kind of felt like he wasn't going to be able to put in as much time as I was hoping to get with him, because he's busy, very busy guy.
yeah.
And it just so happened that Nick was, I believe, moving back to Des Moines for a little while, maybe after Nashville. I'm trying to remember the full timeline, but him and Evelyn, who make up Field Division, were kind of in a transition period, and they were hanging out in Des Moines, back in Des Moines for a while. And so the timing just seemed right to hit up Nick and see if he would like to kind of take what we had done so far and help us arrange the record and learn some synth, or just write some synth parts for the record, that kind of thing. And so we were actually working out of his parents' basement, where he and I started making music together when we were like 15, 16. It was very cathartic to just be back in his parents' basement making music again. It felt like almost too natural or something like that. Very, very comfortable.
Yeah, which is probably the best way to make music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can just remember spending a lot of nights with him and Ben, the 3 of us together, just kind of writing a lot of parts together. And Nick would be like playing some synth parts, and Ben would be automating like delays and stuff like that at the same time. And it was just like a lot of fun experimentation that went into that part of it. And we got as much done as we could, and Nick and Evelyn started traveling again for touring Field Division stuff. And he was mixing on the road, but was busy enough that I was, kind of ready to finish the record sooner than he had time for.
Right.
So this is maybe a year later. I asked Phil if he would be interested to help us finish it and mix it, and he agreed. And I just, at that point, I think we maybe redid some vocals and added a few extra parts, and finished mixing it with Phil.
Cool.
Which is great, because it's in the studio. I communicate very, very well with both Nick and Phil. We work really, really well together, and so it was honestly like kind of perfect, in my opinion, that they were both able to kind of like, use their wizard powers
Yeah.
on the music.
Yeah, it really does feel like Phil's a wizard sometimes when you're watching him work. Like, we don't have to get on too much of a tangent about it, but I always think it's really cool watching somebody like that who knows all the little shortcuts and all the little things to just like
Yeah, it's
fix the thing.
Very smooth working. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, both of those guys definitely have good ears for I don't know, a lot about
Mhm.
what makes a good song.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
a lot about how things fall in a mix and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess having all of those years involved with mixing the record is probably a big part of why it turned out the way it did, which I think
Yeah.
is really great. I mean, the mix is huge and lush and
Mm-hmm.
um,
Oh, and we were talking about
sparkly.
this before we started recording as well, but Phil and I did a lot of experimentation with like the vocal tracks and the saxophone tracks, that kind of stuff. We would send those through delay pedals and automate delays onto those tracks in kind of a live kind of way, and uh, we would send vocal tracks through like a Fender amp to kind of give it like a vintage kind of sound. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, both with Nick and with Phil, there was just a lot of fun experimentation and trying some new stuff and seeing what we could do with kind of like almost, you know, like I don't know, I've never heard of anyone doing like sending a vocal track through an amp. Like that was
Yeah.
not something that I was influenced by, but something we just like threw out there and we were like, sure, let's try that. And
Yeah.
a lot of that ended up on the record.
Yeah, I'm sure that's one of those things that actually is like a pretty old trick. Like,
Totally.
but you know, it's definitely not something you think of if you're not like a studio nerd, you
Right.
know, or something
Yeah.
like that. Um, yeah. Speaking of experimentation and like and working with new tools, this is the first record where you've featured 12-string guitar heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be sort of like an interesting thing where I started seeing you just like have it at every show.
Mm-hmm.
Even I think some of the shows where you were like primarily playing River Monk stuff, or like you were still bringing the 12 string in for stuff. And I guess I'm sort of curious what drew you to that, and like why you felt like that was the new thing for like almost everything you do.
Mm-hmm. Well, that originally that was another Nick Frampton influence. He picked up one. Actually, I think it was Evelyn. Picked up one for their field division and stuff, and I just remember playing it and just absolutely falling in love with the sound of it. It just sounded so much richer and like it had like a kind of sparkly shimmer to it and like a very deep, rich sound at the same time. And so I just kind of started thinking about it a lot, and I went to Evil Old Guitar Center and they had one left. It was a Martin, and I played it and I just absolutely fell in love with it, and I was like, I don't want to regret walking away without it, kind of thing. And it kind of just totally changed the way I was writing, because all of a sudden I felt like I was writing for the for that specific instrument, not just
Mhm.
for an acoustic guitar, but using like starting to incorporate like more drones type sounds into the guitar playing, both strumming and picking, finger picking. It just sounded vastly different to like pluck 2 B strings instead of 1 B string.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
that
sure.
just like creates such a different sound in my opinion. And I don't know, I just became obsessed with it. I loved hearing how different it sounded with like River Monk songs. It just kind of gave all the songs I was playing a little bit new life in a way.
Mm-hmm. Did it change like any parts that you had written before you like with the stuff that's on the first Extravision record? Did it like change how you played any of the parts?
All of those songs were actually written on the 12 string.
Okay.
So that all came as a result of all the songs on the record came as a result of the 12 string guitar, and really just kind of like a big, like, I don't know, it just felt like an awakening I was going through at the time. like a really big download of new understandings and different ways of thinking through things. And so I don't know, there was almost like kind of like this synchronicity with it, like the ways in which I was changing internally, and all of a sudden like being exposed to this what felt like a brand new instrument, even though I could play it the same way as I've been playing guitar the whole time. It, there was just kind of like the two together just like kind of exploded into this like big energetic album that like I feel is like a lot different than any of the music I had ever written before.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, you're talking about the download of information, like, or of understanding. Was that what you said?
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, expand on that a little bit, where like some of these understandings that were inspirational to writing the songs that are on the album.
I think like in my mid-20s is kind of when I sort of like peaked out on like ego, and I was like very like driven with the River Monks. I was very attached to the idea of us like becoming successful. I like really wanted that. And I think as a result I like kind of became a shitty person in a lot of ways, or at least I felt that way internally, that like I was focused so much on myself that I was kind of blinding myself in a way to like how like amazing everything like can be if you look at it that way. How there like obviously like there are plenty of things we need to fix like in our political system, etc., but there's so much more outside of that. So I don't know, I felt like maybe around the age of 27, right around the time River Monks was kind of disbanding a little bit, I sort of just like with the help of friends decided to just kind of like flip a 180 and like just start thinking about things differently, and like wanting to expand my understanding of the universe, and not focus so much on like myself and my own drive and that kind of thing. And so this album, Waking Up, and even down to the name Extravision, it all kind of like came down to this idea of opening up and trying to see, here are my flaws, here are my mistakes, and these are things I can learn from, and not just dwell on those things. I can learn from them, I can become better from them, I can think about like my fears and start to break down why am I afraid of these things. And writing a lot of these songs has been very like therapeutic in a lot of ways, because I'm thinking about my fears, I'm thinking about death more, just because I'm writing about it and singing about it a lot.
It's a big theme on the album.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, we're going right into it. Death. It's you talk about it in Fear of Missing Out. You talk about it. Oh geez, I'm having trouble with titles at the moment.
Okay.
But the last track on the record, which I think you have out as the first single.
Yeah, Moments of Clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Fear of Missing Out are kind of the two that are directly, pointed at the concept of death. And really kind of the concept of trying to be less afraid of it. The fear of missing out is just kind of imagining death as just like another thing. It's like, it's just the next thing. It's not something that it might be a big change, but like we don't know what it is. And so like what we're afraid of is what we think it is, or it's called the fear of missing out. Like I was thinking about like, maybe the biggest thing we're afraid of is just missing what happens after we're gone, or like, afraid of being forgotten, that kind of thing. And Moments of Clarity is really about just breaking it down to kind of, a very simple thing, which is that we are dust, and then we wake up, and then we're dust again.
Yeah, you
And that's okay.
become dirt.
Yeah.
Is the line.
Yeah. And so it's just like saying, if you just tell yourself it's okay,
Yeah.
like, that's, I think, a first step. And that's kind of what I was doing with those songs.
Is that a thing you talked about with Brooks a bit in your travels with him? Brooks Strauss, for the people at home, because that's something that I feel like he addresses in a lot of his music, and I remember when I was listening to Brian Campos's interview with Brooks that I think came out last year. There's like a whole bit where they talk about death, and he's just like really casual about it in general.
Yeah, that's certainly something we've talked about. A lot of conversations with Brooks and I, especially when we're in a car, tend to be how beautiful everything is around us, how small we are, how much, we're oftentimes just trying to explore as far as we can, both like into the universe and into our minds. And he has certainly, helped, more than maybe anybody else, in just like reassuring me that everything's gonna be okay, like when we're gone, And that's a hard thing to cope with sometimes, but his way with words is, wizard stuff. So
Yeah.
he's able to use alchemy and philosophy and science and all sorts of mysticism, all sorts of different things combined to give me therapy, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, what better thing than to be able to talk to your friends in such a way where they can help you feel better in that way, because obviously like death is one of those things that like everybody does have some degree of fear of. But I think it's really cool the way it's addressed in some of these tunes. For instance, we were talking about Moments of Clarity, and in Fear of Missing Out, I really like the image of an endless ground cloud, which like I picture that as being sort of like an earthy green tone, and
Yeah.
like it. The line is, I imagine death, an endless, or a long walk through an endless ground cloud. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just like not a concept I ever thought of, a ground cloud.
Yeah,
It's
a pleasant walk.
a pleasant
It's
walk.
just,
That's
you're
right. That's
just-
what it is.
You're just floating and whatever is next, kind of thing.
It always mixes me up because pleasant and endless rhyme, so I think endless twice. But
right.
but yeah, a pleasant walk. Yeah, and obviously everybody has their own idea of whether there is an afterlife or what it looks like. But I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I mean, what's the point of imagining, the worst possible situation when you could just be imagining that it's nice?
Yeah, it's just like a nice walk in the woods or something.
We won't know until it happens, kind of thing. And we might not know when it happens as well. But
one of the other themes that I sort of noticed listening was taking more than my share or giving back what's not mine. Like those seemed connected to me.
yeah.
Like, I don't know, maybe if you'd care to elaborate on that a little bit, because it does feel like like there's maybe implications there, and maybe you don't want to like
No, it's totally fine.
give
The first
everything away.
reference is from Still Up in the Clouds, which is... That was one of the first songs I wrote on the 12 string specifically. It's kind of a strummer, and it just felt like this is like a new direction that I'm going to be going in now. Like, it feels like it felt like I was kind of combining lots of different influences, like pop punk and folk and rock music. And that coupled with it feeling just like this kind of new awakening, I was just realizing so many things about myself that I wanted to change. That it felt like I was taking more than I was giving. And that, so the line in Still Up in the Clouds is, excuse me, something telling me something's going to change.
Yeah, you don't have to quote the whole thing. It's
I guess that part doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just like weary from taking more than my share.
Yes. Yeah, that's just a recognition of like my privilege as a human being, as a white man in the Midwest with, you know, a supportive family and a supportive group of friends. It's just easy to see like how much I have versus what I don't have.
Right.
And so it feels like, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, excuse me, because we're all just going to be giving it back at the end, you know, at the very end kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Popping a LaCroix. What are these again?
Peach pear.
Peach pear. My God,
Haven't had it in a while.
This is, I think, the best
delightful.
LaCroix I've ever had.
Delightful.
Like, there was this thing I saw on the internet that drinking a LaCroix is like drinking sparkling water, while somebody yells the name of a fruit at you from another room, which like seemed really, really deeply correct to me for quite a while. But this peach pear is on another level.
Yeah. It's really good.
And this is something to be grateful for as well. This peach pear, my God. So I think that's all the lyrics stuff that I had that I was like really into. I mean, I like it all, but that was the stuff that seemed like really good to talk about. In addition, no, yeah, you're good. In addition to the 12 string, it might not actually be that important of a choice for you, but the GNL guitar I think is really cool. And I wonder if there's anything about the character of that guitar specifically that you dug, or if it was just sort of like in your price range or something.
All of the above, really. I had been considering buying like a Fender hollow body or something like that. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to go for with an electric guitar, and I plugged that GNL in, and it sounded amazing without any effects. It sounded like kind of gritty and raw, and I felt like I could kind of dig into it a little bit, and so it felt good for some of the strummers.
Yeah, it's just like soap bar single coils, right?
Yeah, and it also I kind of wrote this newer song that has kind of like almost like a jazzy folk vibe to it, and it sounds really nice on that too, and that coupled with like just some basic Fender tremolo, you know, deluxe reverb kind of stuff. just has a nice classic sound to it.
Very gorgeous, yeah. And possibly, well, the 12 string was very crucial, but another big tool that you've been using a lot lately is the OP1, and that's like such an interesting instrument because I know that in our last conversation you talked a little bit about building this like Latin beat for your cover of All Night Long on it, which then you built the whole song around.
Yeah.
And so not only is it a keyboard and a synthesizer, but also like it has this capability of doing these loops and drum machines and stuff, and it's just this tiny little thing, like it's maybe a foot long or something, and it's just looks like it would be a cheap little piece of shit, but it's like but it does so many cool things.
It's like surprisingly heavy in a way. Yeah, it's a very fun instrument. It comes with tons of amazing synthesizer sounds and drum sounds. You can also sample things and create. I created a synthesizer with the sound of my voice. I created a drum sample with our house drum kit at Kitty City, and it has a 4-track tape recorder function in it as well. You can record up to like 6 minutes on it.
Wow.
And create loops with that. And so I've been writing music starting with a drum beat or starting with a bass line, which is much different than I'm used to.
Yeah, that's probably something you really hadn't messed with in any other band.
Yeah. So it's just a nice exploratory way and a little bit more freeing. I can kind of experiment a little bit more without asking a drummer to do exactly like, dude, I'm gonna try and describe this to you, and you have to try and do it exactly like.
Oh yeah, because that's one of the hardest things ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Is like telling a drummer what's in your head if you're not a drummer.
Right. Exactly.
Like if you can't play drums.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like it seems like with the stuff that has come since you completed writing the first record, that's been like a huge part of how you've written a lot of the new songs.
Yeah, so a lot of the new songs kind of came from... I started this project 3 years ago, and 3 years later is our debut album. So I kind of felt like, because I decided to start touring more and just trying to spread the word of, the project more than anything, I felt like I kind of needed to write more songs that made more sense to play in a solo setting, because I was doing a lot of smaller house shows and just more intimate kind of feel. So the second album is going to end up feeling a lot more intimate, I think, and I've been exposed to and inspired by like some different concepts, because the first album was largely inspired by like Lost in the Dream by War on Drugs and Waking on a Pretty Day by Kurt Weill. Those two albums really kind of left an impression on me. Just their energy, like they have very different energies, but like both energies felt right in a way to me. And the stuff I've been writing for the second album is kind of a lot more like Joanna Newsom, Jose Gonzalez, just like more like intimate folk stuff. But I've also had a few years to like to continue writing, and so it's going to be a mixture of kind of these like intimate folk songs as well as some like kind of experimental synthesizer type songs.
Yeah, which is interesting because like I think it would be easy to think of those two things as polar opposites.
Perhaps,
and,
yeah.
I mean like literally like when I think of intimate, the first thing I think of is never synthesizer.
Uh-huh.
When I think of folk music. I think of that almost as being the antithesis of like electronic music, as
Right.
it were, you know,
Yeah.
EDM. But like
Yeah.
obviously you aren't going to be doing like EDM, but
Yeah,
but,
it'll be a lot of just blending those two things, you know, like folk guitars and synthesizer drums, that kind of stuff.
yeah, those textures.
Yeah, I'm definitely pretty interested in the blending of those, as you say, kind of two opposite ideas. Seeing what happens in the middle.
So
Thanks, John.
my roommate John coming in to feed the fire, keeping
man.
us warm and toasty in here. We're gonna let him enjoy the fire pretty soon, but I guess as we're possibly inching towards wrapping up, we've talked about the album that you're about to put out.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about some of the new stuff, and I guess this might be a decent time to just do a little plugging
Okay.
of what people are gonna see and hear. You know,
Yeah.
on the 17th of this month.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and get this out as quickly as I can, and hopefully people will be able to hear it before the album release,
Excellent.
which is at the Vaudeville Muse, February 17th.
So yeah, I've got a couple of separate things coming up. One of them is a series of full band shows to really celebrate the album, because the album is a full band album. Playing around the state and doing an official album release show at Vaudeville Muse on February 17th. We're doing 2 shows, an early show and a late show. Very excited to play with Hardy Har. We're living up in Twin Cities now, originally from Cedar Falls. My tour mate Nicholas Naoti is playing a solo set of a bunch of new music, I think, is what I've heard.
Cool.
That's the late show. The early show is with Land of Blood and Sunshine and Odd Pets, 2 of my favorite Iowa bands as well. And directly following that, I'm going on a 6-week tour with Nicholas out to the West Coast. We've got about 30 shows booked, mostly house shows, to kind of juxtapose the big full band releases.
Yeah.
I'll be celebrating the full band album by playing solo songs in people's living rooms.
Cool. Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you don't live in Des Moines, but you live anywhere between Iowa and California,
Mhm.
north or south,
Mhm.
there's probably a stop near you to see Ryan with Nicholas Naoti, who really like does all kinds of stuff these days. Like I literally don't know what to expect
It's hard
anymore.
to keep up with how many things he's doing. He's putting a noise record out soon. He's starting a new business soon. A couple new businesses soon. Releasing music with Qubits.
His acoustic stuff is gorgeous too.
Yeah,
He does it all.
he does it all.
So yeah, I think this is the best time to wrap it up. So thanks for being here, hanging out with me, talking about all this stuff. We got a little heavy at times, which I appreciate you being willing to do. And to everybody who is listening, in theory, come hang out with us at the Muse, or hang out with Ryan and the boys in Cedar Falls, or in Fairfield, which is where the other full band releases are, right?
Mhm. As well as Davenport, yeah.
As well as Davenport.
And we're playing at Mission Creek in Iowa City at the Mill on April 6th at 8 o'clock.
Very sick. Yeah. Thanks for being on here. Thanks to you if you are listening. And we're going to end this thing with Waking Up, which is the title track off the record and one of my favorite songs to listen to now that I know the words. So if you get the record soon, make sure you read those words because they feel real good.
And you can find the record at extravisionmusic.bandcamp.com on vinyl, CD, or digital download.
Plug that motherfucker.
Hey, Forrest, coming back at you here. Just a couple quick things before we wrap up episode 1 in its entirety. Thanks for listening to Ryan and I say and like a whole bunch during that. I'm going to try and work on that and also work on my NPR voice for future episodes. Ryan reached out to me the day after the podcast was recorded, just mentioning that he felt sort of bad for not including a couple key people who were involved with the album. As we mentioned earlier, Nicholas Frampton played keyboards and Ben Dixon played guitar, and they contributed some cool sounds as well. In addition to the aforementioned musicians, Drew Rao and Luke Rao played bass and drums on the record, and Kyle Gowan played sax on a handful of tracks, and Ryan just wanted to make sure that their contributions were acknowledged. And you'll be able to see Drew and Luke coming back at the release show for, I believe, the late show, where there will be a heavier focus on playing the material from the record. Additionally, just wanted to say real quick that if you're in an Iowa band, or if you are an Iowan musician, or if you are a musician who comes through the Des Moines area a lot, I would love to have a conversation like this with you. We don't have to talk about death. We can talk about whatever the heck you want, or whatever relates best to your music and what you're trying to get across. I just want to do more of these, and I want to do them with good, artistically driven musicians. So please feel free to message me on Facebook, the Straightening the Record page, or to send me an email at straighteningtherecord@gmail.com. Let's set something up. Let's hang out. All right, thanks so much for listening. One last shout out to Extravision. Hope to see you at the release show February 17th at the Vaudeville Muse. Late and early shows, whatever works for you. I'll be at both. And that's it for Straightening the Record, episode 1. Thanks for listening.
Waking up, going tall, digging out, seeing all, reaching far, taking on, never fall, set for love. Waking up, Rolling on, digging out, seeing all, reaching far, taking on, never fall, except for love.
Hey, Forrest, coming back at you here. Just a couple quick things before we wrap up episode 1 in its entirety. Thanks for listening to Ryan and I say and like a whole bunch during that. I'm going to try and work on that and also work on my NPR voice for future episodes. Ryan reached out to me the day after the podcast was recorded, just mentioning that he felt sort of bad for not including a couple key people who were involved with the album. As we mentioned earlier, Nicholas Frampton played keyboards and Ben Dixon played guitar, and they contributed some cool sounds as well. In addition to the aforementioned musicians, Drew Rao and Luke Rao played bass and drums on the record, and Kyle Gowan played sax on a handful of tracks, and Ryan just wanted to make sure that their contributions were acknowledged. And you'll be able to see Drew and Luke coming back at the release show for, I believe, the late show, where there will be a heavier focus on playing the material from the record. Additionally, just wanted to say real quick that if you're in an Iowa band, or if you are an Iowan musician, or if you are a musician who comes through the Des Moines area a lot, I would love to have a conversation like this with you. We don't have to talk about death. We can talk about whatever the heck you want, or whatever relates best to your music and what you're trying to get across. I just want to do more of these, and I want to do them with good, artistically driven musicians. So please feel free to message me on Facebook, the Straightening the Record page, or to send me an email, straighteningtherecord@gmail.com. Let's set something up. Let's hang out. All right, thanks so much for listening. One last shout out to Extravision. Hope to see you at the release show, February 17th at the Vaudeville Muse. Late and early shows, whatever works for you. I'll be at both. And that's it for Straightening the Record, episode 1. Thanks for listening.